Sometimes, silence is the most powerful weapon. When people mistake kindness for weakness, they forget that even the quietest hearts can strike the loudest blows, not with anger, but with justice. This is the story of Margaret Lewis, a 67-year-old widow who devoted her life to her family, only to be betrayed by the very people she loved most. But when betrayal turned into humiliation, she didn't fight with tears or rage. She fought with the law and won a reckoning no one saw coming. Margaret Lewis had spent 40 years building a life with her late husband, Robert Lewis, a small-town lawyer who believed in fairness and integrity. Together, they built a modest but stable life, a family home, a little savings, and most importantly, a reputation for honesty. When Robert passed away from cancer, Margaret thought her hardest days were behind her. She had her son, Daniel, his wife Sophie, and her teenage granddaughter Emma to keep her company. Daniel promised her, "Mom, you'll never have to worry about a thing. Dad would want you comfortable." And Margaret believed him. For years, she helped around their home, cooking, cleaning, taking care of Emma when Daniel and Sophie were busy. She contributed her pension money toward groceries and utilities, though no one asked her to. She did it out of love. But slowly, things changed. Sophie began to treat her less like family and more like a burden. It started with subtle remarks. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't buy those expensive groceries. We're trying to save for Emma's tuition, you know." Then came sharper ones. "You don't really need your own room, do you? We could use that space for Daniel's home office." And Daniel, too tired from work, said nothing. Margaret stayed quiet. After all, family was everything she had left. One evening, during a family dinner, Sophie announced something unexpected. "Daniel and I are planning to sell this house and move into a bigger one, closer to the city. It'll be great for Emma's future." Margaret froze. That house was hers. It had been her and Robert's home for over 40 years. "Sell this house?" she whispered. Sophie smiled politely. "Oh, don't worry, Margaret. We'll help you move into a senior facility nearby. It'll be easier for everyone. You'll have friends there your age." Daniel avoided eye contact. Margaret felt her heart crack. The walls that once echoed with laughter and family dinners now felt cold, unfamiliar. When she reminded them that the house had been purchased under her and Robert's name, Sophie snapped. "You don't even use your money. Daniel's been paying the bills for years. You should be thankful we're offering you a place to stay." That night, Margaret sat in her room, tears quietly soaking her pillow. But by morning, those tears had dried, replaced by something far stronger. Resolve. She whispered to herself. "Robert, I kept my promise. I took care of them. Now it's time to take care of you." In the attic, among boxes of Robert's old files, Margaret found a small, sealed envelope labeled "In case of my death, legal." Inside was a copy of Robert's last will and testament, one she hadn't read in years. As she read, her eyes widened. Robert had left the house, all investments, and the law firm's residual assets entirely to her. Nothing legally belonged to Daniel, not yet. Her late husband had even written, "If ever my wife is disrespected, displaced, or mistreated, I trust she will act in her own defense as I would for her." Margaret felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from vindication. The next day, she contacted Robert's old law partner, Mr. Halpern, who had since retired but still handled private consultations. When he read the will, he smiled knowingly. "Robert always had faith in your strength, Margaret. It seems he saw this coming." Together, they began a quiet plan, a legal and financial reckoning. Mr. Halpern advised her to remain silent. Let Daniel and Sophie proceed with their plans. Let them believe she was weak and uninformed. Weeks later, Daniel brought her documents to sign. "Mom, it's just paperwork so we can handle the sale easily. Don't worry, you'll be comfortable." Margaret took the papers. She smiled faintly. "Of course, dear. Let me take a few days to look them over." That night, she met Mr. Halpern again. He reviewed the documents. They were transfer of ownership papers, disguised as sale authorizations. If she'd signed them, Daniel and Sophie would have legally stolen her home. Mr. Halpern quietly filed a case in probate court to freeze any property transaction linked to the Lewis estate, citing potential fraud and coercion. It was the first step of her silent revenge. Over the next month, she watched them grow impatient. Sophie sneered. "Honestly, Margaret, it's like you don't want us to succeed." Margaret smiled softly. Sometimes, patience pays better than greed. Sophie rolled her eyes, not realizing just how true that statement was. 2 weeks later, Daniel and Sophie were summoned to court. Confused and irritated, they arrived, only to find Margaret and Mr. Halpern seated calmly before the judge. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the case summary. The plaintiff, Mrs. Margaret Lewis, alleges attempted fraudulent transfer of property, coercion, and emotional abuse by her son and daughter-in-law. Equals. Daniel's face drained of color. Sophie tried to interrupt. This is ridiculous. She's confused. But Mr. Halpern stood, holding up the will. Your Honor, this document clearly states Mrs. Lewis as the sole owner of the property and all related assets. The defendants attempted to falsify documents for their financial gain. Sophie's jaw dropped. Daniel buried his face in his hands. After several hours of testimony, including bank statements, recorded conversations, and legal evidence, the judge ruled decisively in Margaret's favor. The court finds the defendants guilty of attempted fraud. All rights to the Lewis estate remain with Mrs. Margaret Lewis. Furthermore, damages are to be paid for emotional distress and attempted financial coercion. The sum was $280,000, money that came directly from Daniel and Sophie's joint savings and investments. Margaret didn't gloat. She didn't even look at them. She simply thanked the judge, turned to Mr. Halpern, and said quietly, "Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to show up." News of the case spread through town like wildfire. Daniel lost his job at the financial firm due to the scandal. Sophie, furious, moved in with her parents temporarily. Margaret, meanwhile, used a portion of the settlement to establish a small legal aid fund dedicated to helping elderly individuals who were victims of family exploitation. When the first client, a quiet widow from across town, came in crying about her own children's mistreatment, Margaret held her hand and said softly, "Don't worry. I know exactly what to do." They thought she was fragile. They thought she was powerless. But Margaret Lewis proved that dignity and justice are stronger than manipulation and greed. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And when the time came, her reckoning was not one of anger, but of law, truth, and self-respect. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, until they have no power left to take. If you believe silence can be the most powerful answer, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories where justice finds its voice.